So we're at the tail end of what is known as Will Eisner Week, and it's a week where we celebrate the life, legacy, and the work of Will Eisner. Because of that, I thought it would be a great excuse to just look through this wonderful Artisan edition of Will Eisner's The Spirit. Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name is Thomas Patilli. I'm a comic book artist and an illustrator. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, definitely consider subscribing to my channel. But like I mentioned, it's Will Eisner Week. Will Eisner was an incredibly influential and also an incredibly prolific comic artist, cartoonist, writer, creator. He's probably most known for his character, The Spirit, which was a comic book supplement in the newspapers back in the 40s. It was a noir detective style comic, but in many ways it was ahead of its time due to its use of clever design motifs, page layouts, and just very exciting visual storytelling. But perhaps where Will Eisner left most of his legacy was after The Spirit, where he went on to create what is known today as the graphic novel. It was Will Eisner who actually coined the term graphic novel. He's probably most known for a graphic novel that he put out in the late 70s called A Contract with God. But after that, he created so many other graphic novels in the subsequent decades. When I was in art school, I got my hands on one of his books called New York, the Big City, which was a collection of short stories where New York City itself was sort of the main character. I was really inspired by his use of short story and the way he was able to get ideas and concepts and themes across within these seemingly simple short stories. Being a New Yorker myself, a lot of those stories kind of resonated with me in terms of the backdrop of the city, but I just loved his way of expressing emotion and character through the acting of each character's body. He kind of overacts with his characters, and it's one of the things that I really love about his work. At first glance, Will Eisner's work may look cartoony, and to an outsider, it might even look like it's meant for children. But certainly the graphic novels that he created after The Spirit were very much meant for adults, tackling all kinds of themes and concepts that had to do with life and death and relationships. And in many ways, he was very much a pioneer of using comics as a medium to tell stories that weren't just relegated to superheroes or westerns or sci-fi, telling stories that might have otherwise been told through a play or a novel, hence the term graphic novels. On this channel, we often look through the art of some really great comic artists and cartoonists and illustrators to try and get as close to the original source of their art as possible. I have a few of these IDW Artisan editions, which are just smaller paperback editions of their larger artist editions. So this book comes in a much larger version, and it's at the exact scale that Will Eisner was drawing those pages on, and it's hardcover. And so you really, in that artist edition, you really get the full impact and scale of that beautiful original art. This is that same exact material, it's just shrunk down and put into a softcover. It's also like a quarter of the price as well. So a lot of these Artisan editions are very economical, and you still get to appreciate all this beautiful original art. So when it comes to Will Eisner, there's so much to talk about and to cover. But in this video, we're just gonna focus on the original art from this particular book. I think because it's such early work of his, it's a really great place to start. There's certain things in here that you could see that he brings into his later work, but there's also some very specific stuff that really was only captured in his Spirit work. So it'll be fun to look through this stuff. So without further ado, let's open this book and start enjoying this beautiful original art by Will Eisner. It's my understanding that The Spirit was a comic book that was included in the Sunday section of certain newspapers. So it wasn't a newspaper strip, which was common from that era, meaning there were a lot of newspaper comic characters that would be featured throughout the week, and then they would have a longer story on Sundays, like a Sunday edition, which would be a full page, and then throughout the week there would be just shorter strips of that particular story featuring those characters. But with the Spirit, it's my understanding that these were actually like 8-page stories that were printed in a supplemental comic book that would come with the newspaper every Sunday. So it was something that was a little bit different for that time, and in many ways a precursor to the comic book itself. If anyone watching better understands the history of the Spirit and newspaper comics of that era, definitely let me know if I'm correct in that assessment in the comments below. But like I said, as far as I know, that's my understanding of it. Like I said, this is the Artisan edition from IDW, which is just a smaller version of the Artist edition. I've seen the Artist edition version of this book, and they also have another Spirit edition where they collect more of these Spirit original art pages, and they're incredibly large. Artists back then were drawing their comic pages much larger than 11 by 17, more along the lines of something that was closer to like an 18 by 24. So there's quite a bit of detail happening in each one of these panels. But even at this smaller size, you can really see all the detail that's going into each one of these panels and all that really lush, beautiful brushwork. I'm assuming most of this is inked in brush. And like I say on all of these videos, one of the things that I love the most about these artist editions and artisan editions is all the little areas where the artist might have been using whiteout to cover up some stuff, or paste ups where there's a correction, all that stuff. Those are all the little details that I love to see. And I think anyone who's a maker of comics or just very, very interested in the process behind how these things are made, I think we all really appreciate stuff like that. Like you could see here on her face, quite a bit of that is whited out with either white paint or some sort of pro white ink. And you kind of wonder why. Was that just a mistake on his part? Was it a smudge? Or were there just too many ink lines on her face? And he just wanted to go back in and kind of clean that stuff up. I just love stuff like that. But because this is such like a noir-esque kind of comic and story, there's just so much ink and black and white on the page. I love it. And I think that there's just a balance between how much black and how much white goes down. And perhaps that's what some of that whiteout or white paint was used for. Maybe in certain areas, he wanted the figures to pop just a little bit more. But during this time, this was before colored comics. As far as I know, these comics weren't colored. I think in later editions, they wound up coloring this stuff. But as far as I know, these were originally released as just black and white, which was very common for that era. And because of that, the artists weren't relying on color to create time of day or mood or effects. That's why for artists even today, it's really important to look at this kind of stuff, because they were just utilizing either white or black to communicate all of those things: lighting, atmosphere, texture, daytime or nighttime. And if you're so accustomed to, I guess, modern day coloring effects, special effects, and perhaps don't believe that it can be achieved with just black and white on paper, looking at work like this is a really good reminder of that. And when I see art like this, it's just very, very pleasing to the eye. It feels finished. It feels realized. It feels like it's very much grounded on the page. These atmospheres are just really, really beautiful. Just something like rain and water. It feels wet. It feels like a rainy day. It feels windy. Great illustration and comic art like this, it makes me hear the artwork, if that makes any sense. Even without little sound effects like this, I can kind of hear what this scene sounds like. I can hear that wooden sign creaking back and forth. I can hear the wind blowing all the pages through here. The rain pelting down on the ground and these street signs. I can hear it because it's being indicated so clearly and cleverly with the types of marks that he's using to draw these things. I had a teacher a long time ago in art school that would always tell you to sort of think about the thing that you're drawing when you're drawing it, which seems very obvious and not even worth mentioning, but it's really true. Sometimes our minds drift and we're just kind of on autopilot when we're drawing things. But if you really think about rain while you're drawing rain, or think about folds and wrinkles while you're drawing folds and wrinkles, there's a sort of accuracy that comes out of that might not otherwise be accomplished if you kind of just go on autopilot. Same with drawing the figure and specific body language and acting. A lot of times when we're drawing, I know this happens to me quite a bit, especially when I'm working in public, is that if I'm drawing, an angry face or a sad face, I can't help but make that face myself as I'm drawing it. And as weird as that might look to someone from the outside, I think that's a really great instinct to have, because it just means that you're putting yourself into it while you draw. And drawing comic books and illustration, there's a certain level of like acting that goes into it. You want to act through your characters. And if you can add those natural, subtle, kind of human things that happen when characters emote in certain ways, if you could add that to your drawings, there's certain intangible results that come of that. And perhaps the viewer or the reader might not be conscious of it, and they might not be able to pinpoint what it is, but somehow or another they'll kind of feel it. And I feel that when I look at art like this, these characters in many ways feel alive on the page. And I can't help but think that Will Eisner was in many ways really like acting through these characters. And for me, that's one of the things that I feel like I think of most when I think about his work, is his ability to act through his characters with body language and expression. And I really think he took that and kind of ran with it later in his work, in a lot of his other graphic novel work. I think perhaps some critics might feel as though that's a antiquated approach and it kind of dates his work, perhaps. But I think it's really the charm of his work in many ways, and I kind of liken it to watching an old film. It's not going to be like watching a modern day film, but in many ways, I think that's why we watch those older films, is because they were relying on the abilities of the actors and the director much more than perhaps they do today, just because they didn't have all the technology and effects that you can use today to kind of fill in the gaps or pick up the slack in many ways for perhaps a less talented actor or director. And I think that same principle applies to comic art as well. But just look at this beautiful lettering. I mean, all the technical stuff on these pages is really just beautiful. Everything from the page design itself to the lettering to the compositions of these panels. It's all just such top-notch stuff. And speaking of old-fashioned and old-school approaches to things, a panel like this really places this in a certain era. Just this composition and the way the characters are placed and the action is happening, it's very much reminiscent of theater, like play acting, the stage. Nowadays, a panel like this would be composed differently. It perhaps might be over the shoulder of the spirit, or through the grating of the window, or even from the perspective of one of these bodies on the floor. But if a page like this was created in 1947, Will Eisner was already an adult at this point. And so, he grew up with live theater and perhaps vaudeville. He wasn't watching Netflix or HBO. or modern day movies. And so I'm not saying that there aren't better ways of composing a panel like this, but it's just interesting because it's a really great example of how certain media of certain eras really inspire artists in other medias. In a lot of modern day comics, especially the modern day superhero comics, a lot of the compositions and even the pacing of the pages are very much reminiscent and I think inspired by certain pacing that you will see in modern day television and movies. And sometimes that's done really well, and other times I think it's just ineffective because there are certain things that the comic page can achieve that movies and television can't, and then vice versa. And when you try and cram in a certain type of pacing and character acting from other media like movies and TV into the comic page, I think sometimes it can fall flat, and it might not be the best use of the comic page. But regardless whether you like it or not, or it works or it doesn't work, it's just interesting how, whether we like it or not, we're sort of inspired by, the tone and the visual language of the era that we live in. This is a much more subtle intro for the Spirit logo. Will Eisner and the Spirit was very much known for their designy and clever approaches to showing the Spirit logo at the opening of every Spirit story. That was probably the most toned down version in this book. I'm sure we'll see some more clever ones as we keep flipping through this thing. But that was a very specific visual, I guess, gag or design element that Will Eisner brought to the Spirit. And in many ways, it was kind of groundbreaking because something like that wasn't really done in comics prior to that. Like I said, these were 7 or 8 page stories. So he had to cram quite a bit of story every week into these short comics. Hence all of the lettering and pages with a lot of panels on them. I mean, look at this page right here. This has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 panels on just this one page. But if you only have 7 or 8 pages to tell your story, you got to utilize as much as you can out of each page. And like I mentioned earlier, they were drawing these things much bigger than a lot of comics are drawn today. And it was probably beneficial for pages like this specifically. But sometimes I'll go back and read these stories just as a kind of inspiration to figure out how to tell a full-on story with a beginning, middle, and end in a very limited amount of pages. And Will Eisner was really, really great at doing that. And that's why later on in his career, some of his short story work was, I think, some of his best stuff, in my opinion. I think that's a format that he works really, really well in. Will Eisner worked with a lot of assistants, as far as I have read. So these pages, I think, had several hands touching them. He was obviously the primary artist, but he did have, I guess, in some ways, like a studio. I don't think it was as elaborate as like a full-on bullpen, but he had assistants. I think some of his assistants were a young Wally Wood, I think. And I want to say even Jack Kirby was one of his assistants at one point, obviously before Jack Kirby was Jack Kirby. But I do often wonder how he delegated the work to the people that helped him on these pages. Like, backgrounds like that. Was that just a completely different artist, or how did stuff like that work? It feels so cohesive, and it feels very much like him. But I would assume that most of those assistants were helping on backgrounds and atmospheres and things like that, and perhaps even lettering. Turning out stories like this once a week, that's a real tall order. And I think anyone would need all the help that they can get. But as the spirit went on, you can really see how the work just got better and better and really, really polished. In many ways, these were like, little movies once a week. Here's a really cool use of photography on this page. This is just a straight up paste up of a photograph. You can call this a shortcut, or you can call it an artistic design element. I go with the latter. I'm sure it did save some time for sure. You got to cut corners where you can when you are making comics, especially the way he was on a weekly basis. But I love the way he designed the lettering here, where the dialogue boxes are just kind of like pieces of paper that are falling down on the page. Again, there's that design quality to every page that I think really made this stuff stand out to your average reader back then. And this being a piece of original art, you can see where he just cut out these dialogue boxes. And here's some whiteout. In many ways, this is really just like, this is hands-on design right here. There's no InDesign, there's no Photoshop. This is just him probably with an X-Acto blade and some rubber cement or something like that, and just designing this page. It's really, really beautifully done. In that same story, here's another paste up with a photograph for a little establishing shot over there. Really, really cool. I'm curious to see how that would have printed back then. But it's really cool to see how he would incorporate it into the drawing and kind of draw on top of it. And it seems like within this particular story, that's a little bit of a theme. And then this is super cool to see. I guess something wasn't working here, so he just drew this on a separate sheet of paper and then plopped it on. So cool. Who needs copy and paste, right? And then that's just an amazing shot. Look at that perspective. These subtle action lines here that might have been white paint, or that might have been like a razor where he just cut into the paper. Either way, it's a really great effect. And here's some more of just those cut out sheets of paper to create these narration boxes here. Really, really great. For me, this is very inspiring because, I find myself doing these comic pages more and more traditionally. And it's just cool to see that you can do this stuff. It's just another reminder that, yeah, I can just draw and paste right onto the artboard. I think in certain instances, it's definitely beneficial to utilize the technology that we have today to do certain things in, I guess you would call it post-production. But seeing stuff like this is just a reminder that it can be done. Whether I right now have the skills to do it traditionally as he was doing it and as effectively as he was doing it, that's to be determined. But just to know that it's possible is inspiring. Remember, I was talking about the rain before and being able to really feel it and hear it. I think this page is a really great example of that. You can really hear that rain just gushing down. And in many ways, I think you can kind of feel what this scene feels like just by the way he's putting down those brush and pen marks, and by the way he's composing these panels and these shots. Here's one of those examples of incorporating the Spirit logo cleverly into the opener of the story. That's really well done. The Spirit is written there in this brick wall alleyway. really clever design and just really great illustration. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look through this Will Eisner Artisan edition. Looking at work from that era is always so inspiring because compared to today, they were so, I guess, limited in terms of the technology that they had. But because of those limitations, many of which they didn't even know they had, they were able to create such rich, strong, powerful artwork that I think for modern day artists, it's really important to remind ourselves that that stuff can be created with just paper, pencil, some brushes, and some ink. And in Will Eisner's case, certainly in such a prolific way as well. Let me know in the comments, are you familiar with Will Eisner's work? Was this a first for you in terms of discovering his art? If you are a fan, what's some of your favorite Will Eisner work? Is it The Spirit? Is it some of his later graphic novels? Also, let me know in the comments if you would like to see more Will Eisner stuff in future videos. I made 1 or 2 other Will Eisner videos a long time ago, but it would be cool to revisit his work once again and perhaps dive a little deeper into some more of his later graphic novel work. So if that's something you would like to see, definitely let me know in the comments below. Will Eisner was also very much known as an instructor of comics. He taught at the School of Visual Arts for many years, unfortunately before my time there. So unfortunately, I didn't get to study with him. That would have been amazing. But he has also put out, I think, 2 books on creating sequential art for comics. And in those books, he talks about his thoughts, philosophy, and process on creating visual storytelling for comics and graphic novels. So perhaps it might also be cool to look through some of those books in some future videos. Either way, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I look forward to making some more Will Eisner videos in the future. It's always fun for me to look through his work and inspiring, and I'd like to share that with you as well. If you like this video, please do hit that like button. If you'd like to see more videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Also, I finally brought back my Patreon page. I used to have a Patreon page, and then I put it on pause for a few years. But now it's back, and I finally have some really great ideas for how I can utilize the Patreon. And I think there's some things on there that might be of interest to some of you out there. There's going to be a little bit of an educational bent to it. Of course, some behind the scenes process stuff, and also some exclusive Patreon videos as well. So if you're interested in seeing some exclusive content by me that you won't be seeing anywhere else, and you also want to simultaneously help out the channel, consider checking out the Patreon and seeing what tier is best for you. So I hope to see you there, and I really appreciate your support. That's all I got for now. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.